Scientology punishment is gruesome. There are people hiding in terror on earth because they attacked us. There are men dead because they attacked us. Close quote. In another Scientology policy document, Hubbard wrote, quote, "We will become interested in the crimes of people who try to stop us. If you oppose Scientology, we will promptly look up and find and expose your crimes. If you leave us alone, we will leave you alone. It's very simple. Even a fool can grasp that." Close quote. There are dozens of written, copyrighted Scientology policies along these lines, and even worse. In another Scientology policy document, Hubbard directs the church to conduct, quote, "wars of attrition on the basis of total attrition of the enemy. Just go all the way in and obliterate them," he says. "Cut off enemy communications, funds, and connections. Raid and harass," close quote. This past Saturday evening, I received a telephone call from a former Scientologist. This is some of what he told me. He was born into Scientology, and he lived within Scientology until his mid-20s. As a child, he was repeatedly imprisoned for hours and threatened with the loss of his eternity and the loss of this planet to the psychiatrists if he did not sign a 1 billion-year contract to join Scientology's paramilitary group, the Sea Organization, where he would earn $46.20 per week. He was trained to go out to psychiatrists' offices, where he was to set them up in compromising situations so that complaints could be filed to revoke their licenses. This is called psych busting in Scientology, and I have taken many depositions of Scientologists confirming that it is done. Scientology spent months training him convincingly to lie, to perjure himself, and they trained him to harass and to psychoterrorize critics of Scientology. Eventually, this young man snapped. He woke up and he left Scientology. Now he suffers from horrible flashbacks and post-traumatic stress disorder. This brave but traumatized young man was interested in suing Scientology for what they did to him, as well as to focus attention on the conduct of the federal and state governments and what they are doing to allow Scientology to perpetrate such abuse on others. This is some of what I told him, based on my own experience as a lawyer and as a litigant against the cult. It is very expensive to sue Scientology, and for lawyers, it is worse than fighting the big tobacco companies or the mafia. Even if a litigant has $1 million, the church will run that litigant out of money. Time magazine spent over $20 million to prove that its cover story, Scientology, thriving cult of greed and power, was substantially true and not defamatory. In Scientology versus Yanni, nearly $3 million was spent to successfully defend Scientology's former lawyer in 2 trials and 2 appeals. In Scientology versus Fishman and Gertz, nearly $1.7 million was spent to successfully defend Dr. Gertz against a defamation claim. In the Scientology versus Fatnet and Scientology versus Lerma cases, over $2 million was spent to successfully defend and settle fraudulent copyright claims and fraudulent federal search and seizure orders. These few examples involve the expenditure of insurance proceeds and large corporate funds. Most individuals do not have that sort of money available. However, Bob Minton did. He spent over $10 million before Scientology terrorism, bribery, blackmail, and fraud upon the courts forced him into a form of settlement and standoff. Mr. Minton is now so terrorized and threatened, particularly financially and for his children, he now lives abroad. In the Lopez fraudulent investment case, nearly $500,000 was spent on Mr. Lopez's claims before a Scientology legal team, led by now LAPD in-house police attorney Gerald Shaliff, forced Mr. Lopez into a token settlement. The Pattinson versus Scientology case had to be dismissed when Scientology engaged in barratry, went out and found people to sue Mr. Pattinson, and drove Mr. Pattinson and myself into bankruptcy. In the Christofferson case, a judge awarded $30 million in damages to former Scientologist Julie Christofferson. The church ensured that she never saw a penny. The church ensured that Lawrence Wollersheim didn't see the $30 million in damages he was awarded as well. 18 years of endless appeals later, Mr. Wollersheim netted less than $1 million. Quote, "Not one thin dime to Wollersheim," close quote, was the order of David Miscavige, who finally paid a much reduced amount on the same morning the fraudulent Scientology corporate structure was about to be exposed in a judicial opinion and decision. In 1994, I delivered 2 boxes of incriminating racketeering testimony to the United States Attorney's Office in Los Angeles, and was later told that the federal government does not have the resources to fight crime on the scale that the Church of Scientology engages in. That same office recently disbanded its public corruption unit, which makes the situation even worse now. However, unlimited tax-exempt litigation funds are only part of the picture. First, the litigant has to find a lawyer, and there are less than a handful of lawyers nationwide willing to take on the dangers of Scientology litigation. I know one firm who told a Scientology victim that, quote, "You cannot afford us, and we cannot afford you," close quote. A litigant's lawyer can expect the Office of Special Affairs, its lawyers, and its investigators to immediately investigate his entire life, his friends, his partners, and his colleagues and clients. My own law partners have been blackmailed and extorted, clients visited and terrorized, officers infiltrated with Scientology operatives and sleeper agents, defamatory statements spread around the profession, around the media, around the internet. During the Wollersheim case, Scientology even put a microphone under attorney Charlie O'Reilly's bed, and he was beaten up the night before a Court of Appeals hearing. Even his medical records weren't safe from Scientology investigators. Over 20 false state bar complaints were filed in the 1980s against attorney Michael Flynn. Frivolous lawsuits were filed and false criminal reports made. In the 1990s, over 10 false state bar complaints were made against me. There were false police complaints and corroborated, documented testimony of blackmail, bribery, obstruction of justice, perjury, fraud upon the courts, bankruptcy fraud, and judicial misconduct. Multiple fraudulent lawsuits were filed against me, and the fruits of all that criminal conduct is still being used against me with impunity in the Los Angeles courts. Some of our judges are shameless, and they are also part of the problem. In the 1980s, the American Lawyer magazine published an article called "Scientology's War on the Judges."